Hello, this is podcast 3 about Nazi racial policy from 1933 when Hitler became Chancellor up to 1939 when World War II broke out. So the first two podcasts we have looked at Nazi views and secondly the Volksgemeinschaft, the United Racial Community. What we're going to do with this podcast now and the remainder of the podcast is actually get into the details of Hitler's policies towards the Jews. So this one here will be focusing in on the early years, Nazi policies to the Jews 1933 to 35. We'll then move into the Nuremberg Law, September 35, and then the quiet years, 1936 to 7, and then finish off with Kristallnacht, the night of the broken glass of November 1938. So first of all then, Nazi policy to the Jews, 1933 to 35. So you're just looking at the mind map that we used in the revision session there, so you can sort of see the key strands that you need to know about. Okay. Again, key word in the heading, make sure you use that word persecution. Okay, so that's picking on people. Remember, use that word along with that other key word we mentioned, that the Jews were a scapegoat. Scapegoat means targeting a minority of people as a way of winning support for your own policies. So Nazi. The Jews were scapegoats. And I apologise, I do need to buy a new pen for this. Okay, so the Jews were scapegoats. Persecuted, picked on. Okay, remember the Jews were 1% of the German population. They were not a huge proportion. In total, about 500,000, about 500,000 Jews. But Hitler had made it very obvious throughout his years campaigning for power that Jews were not wanted in Germany. I remind you of an earlier point. I know we can get very focused on what eventually happened to the Jews in World War II when the Holocaust was introduced, but there's no evidence at this stage that Hitler was actually planning mass murder. At this stage, all the evidence would suggest that he wanted to make life so difficult for the 500,000 Jews who lived inside Germany that he wanted basically them to get out of Germany, to emigrate, okay, to leave Germany. Okay, so what were the actual policies then? Make sure you use that word anti-Semitic. Okay, anti-Semitism is Jew hatred. And there's that word anti-Semitic. The first anti-Semitic actions that the Nazis took. Okay, so remember, again, quick refresher for you. 28th of February 1933, the Law for the Protection of People and State, that's more commonly called the Reichstag Fire Decree, removed civil liberties. People could be arrested at will. Although that was mainly used to arrest socialists and communists at that time. And then 3 weeks later, on the 24th of March 1933, the Enabling Act, okay, very, very importantly, gave Hitler the power to pass laws without having to take the laws to the Reichstag for approval. And the Enabling Act, of course, opened the way then for Hitler to introduce all sorts of laws. So he didn't really waste much time on that. A week after the Enabling Act, the first concrete action, the first proper action against Jews was taken, and it was on the 1st of April 1933. Now, interestingly, this first action against the Jews failed. Okay, what it was a boycott. Okay, now a boycott is simply putting stormtroopers, the SA, the brown shirts, and you can see a picture of the brown shirt there, standing in front of German Jewish shops, okay, and businesses. You can see he's holding his hand up. He's basically saying, do not enter this shop, okay? If you are a good Volksgenosse, a good national comrade, a good member of the national community, a good German should not be buying Jewish goods because Jews are not real Germans. So effectively it's a way of putting pressure on Germans to not give Jews business, to make the German Jews feel unwelcome. So this is the sort of pressure being put on businesses, and ultimately what Hitler wants to do is if Jews don't have business, they will have to sell up their businesses, and their businesses will then become Aryanized. They will be taken over by racially pure Germans. Actually, the boycott failed. It was very embarrassing for Hitler. He called it off after one day. Why? Because most Germans ignored it. Okay, I made that point in the previous podcast. That the Germans, the majority of German people, were not anti-Semitic. Most Germans had neighbours and friends who were Jews. They got on well with Jews. They backed Hitler into power for other reasons, because he promised strong leadership and unity and so on. They didn't back Hitler into power because of his hatred of Jews. So that was really a failure. So it's certainly the first point you need to mention if you get a question about Jewish policy in the early years. Okay, so other things. Okay, armed with the Enabling Act, you can pass laws at will. The Nazis passed a whole series of laws, but basically you can break them into three types in the early years, 33 to 34. The first type of law were laws that banned German Jews from working for the German government. Okay, so civil servants, for example, could not be Jews. Jews could not be employed in the German army, for example, or the German police force, for example. So that was the first type of law. Secondly, Jews had to have their own separate public facilities. Okay, so they were not allowed to share public facilities such as parks, public parks, and there's a picture there to the right of a sign saying "Juden sind hier unerwünscht," which basically means Jews are not welcome here. Okay, they're not welcome here, and that's a sign in front of a park. So those are laws which are separating, Jews. It's basically saying you have to have your own separate facilities. Okay, they were still allowed to have their own facilities, but they were Jewish parks. Swimming pools in particular, because remember the Nazis view the Jews as vermin, as filth. Their blood is impure, and so therefore swimming pools were seen to be a primary means for healthy Germans to become infected by impure blood. So swimming pools could not be shared, and schools. You will often see pictures, photographs from the early months of the Nazi period in which Jewish children were being humiliated by non-Jewish Germans in classes, etc. But that didn't last very long, because very quickly Hitler passed laws that said Jews had to go to separate schools. And then the final type of law was Jews were increasingly excluded from the professions, such as they could not be doctors, they could not practice as doctors, unless they treated only to treat the other Jews. Okay, so Jewish doctors were not allowed to treat Aryan clients, and so on and so forth. So the professions were separated. I mentioned in the revision session some really bizarre ones. For example, if a Jew had a pet, they couldn't take the pet to an Aryan vet. They had to have separate vets. But then, really, we're talking about trying to understand thinking processes that make no sense, really. So Jewish professionals could not have Aryan clients is the key point there. So learn those three categories. So at this early stage, as we said at the beginning, it seems that the Nazis' main aim was to reduce Jews to being second-class citizens. It is to encourage Jews to leave the country. And there's another key word. Use it in your answer. But that means the word is to emigrate. Okay. As a result, many of Germany's Jews voluntarily emigrated abroad. and there's a useful map there, just zoom in on it, that shows the destinations of German of Jews who emigrated, and the numbers of Jews. Now remember, German Jews, there were a total of 500,000 in 1933. It's only 1% of the population, about 500,000. And this map shows you by 1938 where they had gone to. So for example, you can see over here that a huge number of them went to America. 102,000 went to the United States. 6,000 went to Canada. Quite a lot, you can see down here, 63,500 went to Argentina. Okay, again, useful figures. 30,000 there went to France. Okay, not that many went to France. The French were not very keen about allowing Jews in. The government in France at that time was quite right wing, so there was quite a strong racist element in the French government at that particular time as well. And of course, again, just zooming in here, a big destination, or a big area down in the bottom corner there, was Palestine. Now Palestine was the original Jewish homeland that the Jews had been banished from 2,000 years ago. Palestine was ruled by the British after World War I, and the British allowed a proportion of German Jews, 33,000 were allowed to return to Palestine, relatively small numbers. But a lot of the Jews went east to Eastern European countries, so 25,000 went to Poland, and 5,000 went to Czechoslovakia, 3,000 went to Hungary, etc., etc. The irony here, I mean, you've got 30,000 went to the Netherlands, that many of these Jews escaped Hitler's rule, and then of course in the late 1930s Germany invaded these countries. Germany invaded the Netherlands, invaded France, invaded Poland, invaded Czechoslovakia, and so Jews who had escaped Hitler's rule found themselves back under Hitler's rule at a later stage. Okay, so those are the key figures there. And the final point then, which again is a fascinating point, Germany lost most of her talented and creative citizens. I mean, who were these Jews? Although Nazi propaganda portrayed them as vermin, they weren't. They were like any other Germans. In fact, a huge proportion of Germany's most talented and able citizens, filmmakers, writers, and in particular scientists, were Jews. Filmmakers, for example, many of them, of those 102,000 who went to America, the proportion of them were makers of films, very, very talented film directors and writers, and they went to Hollywood. And in during World War II, in the 1940s and the 1950s, many of the great Hollywood films were written by German Jews and were directed by German Jews who'd escaped Hitler's rule. Many talented writers took their talents to other countries, and of course scientists, very, very talented scientists, got out of Germany, and that was something that Hitler later regretted. Okay. For example, the Americans used German scientists who'd escaped Germany to develop the atomic bomb, and of course Hitler, try as he might, was not able to catch up with the Americans and did not develop an atomic bomb, thankfully. Okay, so that's the end of this podcast. If you go on to the next podcast, which is about the Nuremberg laws. Thank you.